Welcome to the Localization Fireside Chat. I'm Robin Ayub, your host. Join me for captivating conversations with industry leaders exploring localization, translation, and global communication. Ignite your curiosity as we expand your horizons through these conversations. So let's dive in together into the Localization Fireside Chat.
Hey, good morning, everyone. My name is Robin Ayub. I'm the founder of the Localization Fireside Chat podcast and YouTube channel. This relatively young platform, only 6 months into this, has given me and given the audience an incredible opportunity to listen to thought leaders in our industry, in the localization industry, and variety of business leaders. They come and share their opinion on this channel to tell their intriguing stories when it comes to localization, languages, etc., technology that's affecting our business as well, and to also discuss some of the trends that are taking place in our industry, some of the challenges and some of the innovations that are happening right now in our industry. So if you have not done so already, I encourage you to press the subscribe button, comment on our videos, our podcast, and engage with our content. We really appreciate that. Today, I'm honored to have with me Carrie Fisher, a returning guest to this channel. Carrie, for those of you who don't know, she's the president of Women in Localization. She's also Globalization Service Manager for Subway. Carrie, welcome back. Hopefully it's not too early in Idaho. And if you don't mind, just letting the audience know a little bit about you for those who don't know you.
Sure. So I'm Carrie Fisher, as Robin said. I basically am in charge of all of Subway's translation content. So all the departments, all the regions come through me to get their stuff translated. President of Women in Localization, past board member. I'm also a co-chair of Subway's ERG called Empower Her. It's a Women in Leadership employee resource group within Subway. And, you know, for fun, I'm the secretary of my HOA. So apparently I love being on boards. I'm not really sure, but I do believe in giving back, and that is giving back to the organizations that have done so much for me, Subway, Women in Localization, and my community here in Boise, Idaho.
Absolutely. Well, pleasure having you with us this morning. Carrie, this channel is a big supporter of Women in Localization, a variety of other like-minded associations that supports special causes and causes in general. So thanks for being with me this morning. And for the audience today, we thought we'd talk, Carrie and I, have a little coffee chat about teaching kids early in the age another language and the effect that could have on themselves, society, and the globe in general, the planet in general, in terms of when we learn another language, what impact that would have on the variety of aspects of things, job opportunity, down the road, interaction with other cultures, building bridges between cultures, and on the physical matter. And I was just telling Curry before we started the recording, on the physical matter, I found out that through they did some scientific studies, and they did some MRI on the brain function for those who are bilingual, or they are trilingual and they speak more than one language. And if they happen to have that practice in their life, flipping between languages, they found through the MRI that the brain has a different pattern. It's more elasticity. That creates more elasticity in the brain, which reduces the cognitive decline down the road in the brain function, which is on the physical side, it's absolutely great. And I can't wait to dive into the topic. Obviously, it's near and dear to everybody's heart. It should be a topic to everybody's interest here. So, Carrie, what's your thoughts on the topic?
Gosh. So, having a degree in French myself, of course, I'm going to be passionate about learning different languages, mainly through school, right? Because there are a lot of us that my family's been here for generations. We can date ourselves back to the pilgrims, right, coming over to America. And so I didn't have a second language in my house. So I discovered language through school. And my father encouraged all of us, me and my three sisters, to really follow our hearts, follow our passions, whatever that might be, because he said it will work out. You will find something, in the field of your passion. And of course, my mother was like, what are you going to do with a French degree? I guess you're going to teach. So there is a disconnect, I think, between education in general and the localization industry. So yes, I mean, there are other advantages, of course, to learning another language, opening a door to a new culture. My son is in his now third year of Japanese, loves it. Went to Japan for the first time over the summer and got to stay with a family with 3 kids. And just that experience, and I've done it. When I was in college, I lived with a French family. So just having that experience, I think, really opens young people's minds to other cultures, other possibilities, and, maybe what they could do with their lives, or it may have nothing to do with their career. But the fact that they have opened, their minds to other cultures, it's just, there's so many advantages to it. Communication, empathy. And I do think it actually helps people who are maybe getting a job for the first time. The fact that they've experienced another culture and, have dealt with things that they didn't understand and yet were able to react. I think that's a resume builder. So yeah, my passion is really, I'm seeing, and that the statistics are there, more and more schools, at least in America, are not requiring, more and more states are not requiring foreign languages as a requirement. It used to be you had to have at least 2 years in high school. And now it's gone. And the same thing at universities. And I'm thinking, my God, who's gonna replace us, Robin, when we retire? Who's gonna be the next generation? And so that's been kind of my passion for the last, year.
If we start with the premise of thinking, and I love that topic here because I'm like you, I speak 3 languages, and just to give a little bit of myself on this talk here, I started my life at home speaking Arabic. I was born and raised in Lebanon, and came at a young age, late teens, started traveling, left the country, and I spoke in school. I spoke French, and the French, not the Quebec French, because I'm in Canada right now. We spoke French, French. And then I started traveling, and I came to Canada. I didn't really speak a word of English when I arrived here, and I arrived in, I want to say, like early 20s, 2021, I think. And I thought, okay, so what do I do? So I went, you sort of go through the notion of saying you want to go to a French region, and so you can adapt, you can build your brand new life, you're a new immigrant to a new country, you're going to start something. Communication is the biggest hurdle. So anyway, so through that process, I ended up in New Brunswick, and I don't know, it's a bilingual province. Obviously, it's the only bilingual province in the country. And it was easier for me to switch because they speak a different type of French, where French is, in some areas, at least not all areas, in some areas, French is mixed with some English. So I kind of was brand new to me, and I, in my 20s, I didn't know how to deal with this. So it was easier for me to learn English. And believe it or not, I did not go to school to learn English. I sort of, like a sponge. I only went to, after a while, I wanted to perfect my English. I went to university and took business English communication. So just to make sure that I'm doing things correctly. But if we start for, like to loop back to where we started the conversation, start with the premise of that most conflicts in the world, and I don't want to turn this podcast into something like political or anything like that. That's not the case at all. Most conflicts come to the world either on a smaller scale, micro scale, like in a neighborhood, or in a larger scale between countries. I believe, stems from misunderstanding each other. A human misunderstanding each other leads to conflict. Now, if we start with the end of that particular premise, and then we move forward and say, okay, so if I learn another language, if I'm going to learn another language, not because I hate the culture, I want to understand it better. I want to understand that culture so much that I'm willing to spend time, effort, resources to learn that language. It creates those bridges that you and I talked about earlier. So when your son, for instance, learns Japanese, is because he finds something interesting and he wants to build on that and he wants to learn it. Now, you mentioned something very early, in the conversation that, learning the language, and that's what I found out, learning the language in early stages, like a couple of year old or a year and a half old, etc. I don't know what the exact number is. Learning early, it builds that preset in the function in the brain that makes you open to other learnings down the road. So you're not necessarily going to learn 5 languages early start on, maybe some people do. But down the road, you already open that white sheet of paper in somebody's brain to accept another language at ease.
Yeah. Yeah.
Any thoughts on this?
Wait. You have opened it up. So it's funny. It's a funny story. I remember being pregnant with my baby, who's now 16, and thinking I'm only going to speak French to this child so he can grow up, in a dual language household. So many personal things happened, and I'm sorry, having a baby and working full time, and then being a very a single mom, essentially, all that went out the window. So, but I had the intention of only speaking French. But at least he picked up Japanese, so at least something maybe rubbed off later on down the road. I agree. In America, you kind of start a new language in sometimes in late junior high, but it's usually high school. Boy, I would love to see language introduced in kindergarten, because that's when I think the ability it's innate I think in every child. And like you said, it's just you're a sponge. You can pick it up, and if you're just given the chance. And that's what I think
from an intellectual perspective, though, Gary, from an intellectual perspective, it must do wonder, and I know for sure it did to me, in terms of the ability to learn. It accelerates the learning process, in my opinion, because now, I take, for me, for instance, if I am reading a document in one language, let's say user manual for something, we buy something for the house and I have to put it together and I'm reading something in the user manual. Now I've got three languages to choose from. I got to get it right.
That's right.
Because a lot of times what happened is, and criticizing the industry a little bit, that these user manuals are not really properly translated in some cases. Sometimes I have to digest I know it. I got to read them like the 3 different languages to make sure that I'm not missing anything. But that gives me the ability now, and if you're not a user manual, you're not just reading an email and I'm not understanding it, I can flip it to another language. And now I'm getting the picture a little bit more clear. It accelerates the learning, and it affects how you learn other topics and how do you communicate with cultures. We talked about cultural connections earlier. If you learn a language and because you love the language, you're obviously gonna get to learn the food, the theater, the culture, the art of that particular community, a particular culture, and you got to immerse yourself.
Yes.
But what is the impact? And this is pretty interesting. Let's say take a hypothetical scenario, and everybody in school today is capable of communicating in one, maybe in more than one language. So let's say US. Let's target Spanish language. So everybody in the US speaks 2 languages, English and Spanish. I know we're far from there, but I'm just thinking in technicolor here. What would be the impact on our industry? What would that do to the localization industry? What do you think?
Oh boy, what a good question. What would that do? Gosh, that's really thought-provoking.
Do you think we translate more? Do you think we translate less?
Right. That's immediately what came to mind. Would people lose their jobs? Right. Everybody thinks of AI taking jobs. What would happen if we could all speak, all these different languages? Yeah. If it was just us in the loc industry and people had to rely on us, yeah, we would have jobs forever. Um, but your example was, what if everybody in North America or US, whoever, spoke two languages? What would that do to well, what would it do? Because this is common, right? In the Netherlands, everybody that I know speaks English
Yeah.
better than Americans sometimes. What does that mean? They still communicate in their native language, but they're able to communicate in English just as well. Does it mean that we don't translate into Dutch? No, we do. Subway does. Yeah. We have our headquarters in the our European headquarters in the Netherlands. What does that mean? So I don't know. I don't think it would mean we translate less or we translate more. It's just, I don't know, part of the ecosystem. I think I don't know, more interesting thought was, gee, what if we all spoke 10? What if all these countries spoke 10 languages? What would happen to the loc industry?
I would imagine the demand for translation will go up because not all previously translated content is available in both languages anyway. I'm assuming in the US, there's a ton of content that's not translated, and the demand for those existing content to be put in Spanish, it goes up because instead of having 30% of the population asking for it, now you've got 100% of the population asking for it.
That's right.
Obviously, some people prefer it in English. That's fine, but some people will prefer to see it in Spanish, and all of a sudden, the percentage of those individuals will go up as well, right?
Yeah.
Now, from and this is a thing too. I mean, you hire people. We all hire people in our capacity. So when you see something on resume that this individual who you're trying to hire speaks more than one language, you're already viewing them in a different lens. Which brings me to the topic of career opportunity down the road as you master, 2 or 3 languages, how much, that will expand the horizon from an employability perspective. And the other factor is that now we know that most of us post-COVID, we are working in remote areas, remotely, connected to somewhere, to a headquarters somewhere. That headquarter doesn't necessarily need to be in the country where you are, in the state where you are, in the province where you are. It could be on another side of the planet. So the employability of that individual all of a sudden goes from a community base to a global base. And now you have 2 or 3 languages. I'm assuming you can write your own ticket at this point. So that's an impetus really for people to, math, physics, and all that stuff is very good. And I encourage everybody not to drop those, but adding a language on top of those, on top of those subjects, it's fundamentally shifting now the paradigm from an employability perspective to those individuals. Am I correct?
I agree. Even if you're working for a company that's in a certain country and all of a sudden they decide to go global. So in America, that happens all the time. And if you've got an employee who has lived in Spain, wherever, it doesn't really matter. They've experienced another culture. They can relate their stories of, oh gosh, because I didn't have this skill, I had a really hard time ordering food. We need to make sure that everything is in euro. We need to make sure, whatever it might be. It translates, no pun intended, it translates well into, your ability to grow, I think, within a company.
Absolutely. And, take it a step further, we always talk about it, teaching people at the young age another language, but I've seen many people trying to learn languages even at as they get ahead in their life, they retired, they want to travel a little bit more. That's what drive learning at that age is, the travel portion, not because of career, but for the travel thing. I want to go to certain country, I want to be able to speak their language, and then they use various tools that are available online to help them, or they go to classes. I've seen a lot of people go to language classes, 50, 60 years old, and they're learning languages. The point of that is learning doesn't stop. We are learning beings as a human. And, when we stop learning, we basically die.
I agree.
And so if the subject of learning languages is important at a young age, it's equally important at any age, in my opinion. But what happened is if you learn a little bit of another language, and your big evidence to that, and how you were talking earlier about your son and speaking to them and speaking to him in another language or French at home, it trains the brain. Because I've talked to people before, like where they live in an isolated community, they don't have a lot of immigrants around them, they don't have a lot of intercultural mix, and they never heard of another language before. Maybe they TV or something. Now the world is interconnected, but for those who never really frequent another language, it's quite the dynamic to see that, because first is they don't know how to process that, and they're not if you ask one of those individuals go learn another language, it's very difficult. But if you at early age and you've gotten used to the idea that there's more than one language in the world, and I'm already familiar with one or two, learning another one at an older age, it's much easier, much better for an individual. Correct?
I would think so as well. Yeah. And you're right. There's so many programs. My kid, even before starting high school, starting junior high, there was an app, which I won't mention, has quizzes. So it makes you say the language. And he was learning Spanish and Japanese. And it was just super interesting to him. But it was the in-person experience, I think, within a classroom that really helped solidify the language learning. And I think as an adult, if I took another language, I want that interaction. I want the personal interaction. But it's already opened the door. So I discovered Spanish actually in high school and took all 4 years, and then discovered French my sophomore year. So I took 3 years of French, and then my dad really encouraged me to take Russian. This was in the 80s, right? Cold War, all that good stuff. He's like, you're going to need this. So I took Russian as well. Yeah. But yes, I truly believe that opened, if I ever wanted to learn another language, I know I can do it. And I've already had the experience of learning 3. So
good for you. The other point that we've talked about is empathy and understanding. So learning another language enables us to form and foster empathy for cultures and for other languages that we probably haven't been exposed to before. We've read about them in English, but not like actually speaking the language, living the culture a little bit, being exposed to the culture, and building those bridges between cultures, which is very important. I mean, breaking down those barriers. It's language barriers. We don't understand the emotions. We don't understand the thinking, the thought process. I remember watching, and I'm going to get into the learning here a little bit, but stay on the empathy for a bit. And, it's phenomenal. You see a lot of right now, like, and I was going back from, if you go back a few hundred years ago, communities were married from the same communities. Like, if you are in a certain country, you marry that individual, you form a family within that with those communities, and they're very homogeneous, if you will. Like, there's no mixing between languages, cultures, etc. Now we're seeing a lot more of that, and the world is interconnected. Human are human. It doesn't matter which country they come from, or race, or background, etc. So, and we're seeing a lot of that interconnectivity that is building what I like to call a global community. Now, you see Canadians, Americans marrying Japanese, marrying Spanish, and that's, back in the days that would be like big no-no. Now it's normal. It's something that people are embracing, which is, we're lucky to be living in this day and age.
Yes.
And it's breaking down that barrier, if you will, of it's, oh my God, it used to be taboo. Now it's more like, let's embrace it. Let's bring it closer to us. And people are forming wonderful families and wonderful communities resulting in that. Like, the outcome of this is absolutely phenomenal on the positive side.
Yes. It's funny. I don't know. I come from a very conservative state with a lot of older people.
Yeah, I know.
They would agree with that. I agree with that. I worked at Oracle, and one of my colleagues was Irish, and she married, an Indian guy. And so they would spend half their summers were in Ireland and half were in India, and lovely, huge family that, they were raising in the States, but, speaking all different kinds of languages. And I love that. I think you're right. This is how we learn about each other. It even goes back to when you started speaking, I thought of Romeo and Juliet, even though everybody was white. It was two different families, right? They were feuding. Well, gee, we could find love even in the most difficult of situations.
And in the communication, if you take that to another step and you say, okay, so I learned another language, now what do I do with it? From a communication perspective, I can't emphasize this strength this will give, because if you've learned to communicate in one language and you've learned the nuances of communicating with another language, and you start blending those two together, it makes you that more effective communicator in terms of watching out for cultural nuances in your communication, which is very, as you know, and our industry is very famous for that, and we evangelize that cultural nuances in everything we do, in our translation, in our machine translation designs, etc. You got to be aware of what's to be said, what's not to be said, what's to refrain of using in one culture versus another culture. That makes us a lot more sensitive to those, and it makes you, on a job level, if an individual has those skills and possesses those skills in a variety of languages, makes them a lot more effective and more employable, in my opinion. They're not going to fall into the trap. Oops, I made a mistake. I should have called that person this name. Meanwhile, you should not have used it to begin with, because you are aware of it now. If you're not aware of it, it's okay. But if you are aware of some cultural nuances, then you work around that and you work them into your communication strategy. How does that work in your world?
When I think I talked about this before, but I remember going to Japan. I don't speak a word of Japanese, but being the head of a localization department at Hyperion Solutions, which was bought by Oracle, they were very unhappy with the translations. It was only like 2 words, but it was enough, right? And they flew me out, had me go around to all the Japanese partners and get yelled at after they served me tea. And but it was such a great learning experience to see the interactions. The communication style was completely different, and just even nonverbal communication of nodding your head, and even maybe a little bow, acquiescing to, oh, I made a mistake, and even the little that the Japanese do to, I don't know, say yep, I understand. That was huge for me, and it was very uncomfortable, but I'm so glad I did it, because I don't know, now I feel like I can communicate, and even if I don't speak the language, it's the nuance of the communication that is key to know and to understand.
So what do you recommend? Let's talk a little bit about what do we recommend to our audience here in terms of, let's talk about it in age category. So for children, for kids, when and how do you recommend, for those individuals who are interested in, putting their kids into another program of another language, for instance, learning another language, what is the easiest way to get into this? I know there's private, there's public, there's a variety of things. What do you think?
Hiring help, hiring a nanny that speaks a different language. How about that? That's how my nephews learned Spanish. Their nanny spoke very little English, and so she would speak to them in Spanish, and they got it. Yeah. And that you have to have childcare, if you're gonna work. So that's one. I guess that's one way of introducing language to, or or daycare, right? So my son went to a home daycare. Unfortunately, everyone spoke English, but finding a daycare that is multicultural, I think that's the easiest and cheapest. If you can't afford a private school, and who can these days, might be a very interesting way to introduce your child to a different language and different culture.
So for our global audience, just give us an idea about the public education system, I guess, when it comes to second language in the US. I'm assuming that's not available?
No. I'm trying to think of here in Idaho. So we moved here when Christopher was 5. So he went to, there was no language course, class, whatever available to him in the public schools in Idaho. Junior high, don't believe so. It was high school. And again, it's not mandatory. It was an elective. So it's a tough one, which is why I'm, kind of on the warpath, if you will, of really, partnering with ACTFL. I don't know if you're familiar with the American Council of Teacher of Foreign Languages. ACTFL is, I've known that acronym since I was in high school. So, they're starting a nonprofit arm, and I'm kind of interested in putting my foot in that door, because here's a way that I can influence, hopefully, the American school system to get foreign languages back in the classroom, because they're no longer required. And yet, 90–80% of companies want people with a different foreign language, a foreign language or cultural experience outside the United States. And we're not doing anything to make our students more marketable in the future.
So where can we find more information about ACTFL for our audience if somebody's interested in learning more about that association, which I think it's a worthy cause to at least support somehow, either by looking at their content, sharing their content, engaging with them. It would help.
Absolutely. So their website is actfl.org, so actfl.org. And then their nonprofit arm, which is just starting up, is called Language Connects Foundation. And that is literally languageconnectsfoundation.org. And there you can really find, I'm on the website now, and it's their top story is an urgent call for multilingual talent. They did a study, and the key findings include 9 out of 10 U.S. employers rely on employees with language skills other than English. 56 say their language demand will increase in the next 5 years. There's 1 in 3 language dependent U.S. employers report a language skills gap, and 1 in 4 U.S. employers lost business due to lack of language skills. So we got to get on this.
Yeah, so you bring up a very valid point. I mean, in this case, we're talking about ACTFL, but our industry needs to be engaged with many like associations or organizations in the world. Not necessarily to be an industry where we receive, the order to process things, service industry, that's what we do. But we also need to influence the policies and be working with those agencies and organizations to affect how language policies shapes our industry and shape our communities too. Because, first to start with the community, which takes effect on our industry as well. And without those policies, I'm using Canada because I am in Canada right now, and this is the country I understand well from a language perspective, is that if we do not have language policies in Canada that, enforce or not necessarily enforce, in some cases it's elective, but it's more like you have to translate in Canada. You cannot not translate. You want to sell in Quebec, you need to be translating your content to Quebec, right? Yes. So it is not a choice. Unless you don't want to work in that environment, that's fine. I mean, there are some companies, they decide to work in their own regions, English speaking in Canada. They don't interact in that. But if you are a national company, you're covering this country, ocean to ocean, basically coast to coast, you have to translate to another language. Another country, which is another great example, is Switzerland. You got 3-4 languages in the country, and you have to do those in. I wonder where is the U.S. policy on language now? Can you give us an update on that one?
The U.S. Oh, I have no idea what the U.S. policy is on language.
Do you have a language policy in the U.S.? Are you aware of any? Like,
Meaning
is there
things have to
is
be
there like a
required,
mandate
translated
the
into
government
certain
that
languages? Is that what you mean?
Yeah.
I don't know if that's a
I
U.S.
haven't heard of
policy
any.
or state. You know, it's probably by state. It could be even by county. I bet certain emergency communications or, you know, something have to be translated into the languages that are more prominent in those particular states. But to be honest, I don't know what the policy is on providing language other than English, languages other than English to the population for certain things. That's something that's a
Yeah,
great
you
research.
bring up a very you know, good point that I've seen policies on the state level in the U.S.
Yeah.
Federally, there are several, but it's
Okay.
not mandated ubiquitously across the entire country. There are some programs that they target, like civil rights or a bilingual education act, or Every Student Succeed Act, which has some bilingualism in there. There's also something around the National Security Act initiative for languages as well. They consider languages part of the national security as well. So if you learn more than one language, you're part of that. So and there's also something on the in the Act for Foreign Languages. Sorry, I did some research while we're talking. The Foreign Language
I'm writing
Assistance
it
Program.
down because I want to remember this.
I'll send it over to you. And also the preservation of indigenous languages, which is a very big topic for us in Canada. There is one for you guys in the U.S.
It is, yeah.
It's called the Esther Martinez Native American Language Preservation Act in 2006. Took effect. So again, it's not a bilingualism thing, but it's driven by cause. It's driven by support of certain causes, and I understand that California has one of those. I think the most prominent language support, if you will, from a consumer perspective for you guys. So if you have, from my understanding, if you want a specific contract or specific content in a language that you like to see it in the U.S., specifically in California, you have the right to ask for that.
I believe that because I remember so I lived there for 10 years, and I remember going to the Department of Motor Vehicles, and you could take the test in several different languages.
Yeah. So there you go. And going back to learning another language, it's for me personally, and going by my personal experience as you know, as I grew up and where I am right now, and if I'm traveling now, I go to another country, people don't believe it. Like I can read we went to Portugal a few years ago. Never been to Portugal before. I was able to read the signs and make sense of it because I speak French and I speak English, and I'm a little bit familiar with Spanish, so I can read what it says, and I can just I don't have to use the Google Lens to figure it out. It's okay. I can understand it. So it opens my mind on other languages. It opens my mind on how I perceive other languages and how I understand them. And the one of the biggest thing is that the speed of learning, it's crazy. Because if I go to another, it's not one of those things I need to live there for 5 years to learn another language now. It's more like 6 months, and I should be able to communicate, not perfectly. And I say this to people like who wants to learn another language: don't be shy of making mistakes. The worst thing you do is you're afraid, you don't want to make mistakes, and you wait till everything is perfect before you pronounce your first sentence.
Right.
It's not good. You have to learn by mistakes, and that's every language. It comes with the territory. Don't be shy. Try it. And if you make a mistake, so what? You try it again, and next time you do better.
That's right.
I remember when I started speaking English, I was I'm a computer grad, so I'm a programmer, so I'm not communicating that much. But when I do something at the company I was working for, I have to write a memo in English telling the users how to use the program. I remember it was one of those, and it's great because this is another aspect too. If another culture sees you learning their language, they're embracing you, they're helping you, they're trying to make you do better with that language. So I remember, my colleagues, which they're trying to help me, and they have no interest other than to see me succeed, I guess. At that point, try to come with me to write a memo in English, and it was part of my learning process. I did not write perfect, and it was not, something I pride myself on writing in English. No, I don't know how to write in English at that time. But people were coming together to help me write better, to do better, to learn better. Now, there are some of them that I still remember their names, and I'm not going to mention them on this podcast. They used to make fun of me when I speak English, which is fine, perfectly fine. When they made fun of me, it told me that I made a mistake and I have to do better next time. I did not take it personally. So this is
I don't see it. You speak like a native to me, so I don't understand that at all.
But that's early on,
right?
I improved it quite a bit on.
Yeah, being a nerd. I mean, being a computer geek, and not knowing English. Yeah, you had like not 2 strikes against you, but some challenges there.
Yeah. So the point is learning is important. And the second thing I would like to say, if you're learning another language to our audience, there is something called thinking in another language, not necessarily just speaking it. So when you're learning, you have to think in that language. So let's say I want to say something in French. Before I start saying it in French, I'm playing it in my mind. I'm thinking in a situation where that sentence applies. How do I formulate it, etc. When your brain starts thinking in Spanish or French, or whatever the language you're thinking about, right? And I remember one time I was watching one of those old movies back in the days, and this person is trying to fly a plane, and that plane program and computers are programmed in another language. The pilot puts the helmet on, and the helmet has some smarts in it, some intelligence in it. It reads your brain, and unless your brain think in that language, you're not going to be able to fly that plane. So that resonated with me, thinking that I always now have to think of that language before I start speaking it.
Oh, yes, that's really interesting. Thinking in that language. Sometimes I will dream in a different language. In high school, what helped me, one of the things that I would do, I would take popular songs that I would hear on the radio and translate them, into French or Spanish. And the one that comes to mind is Sesame Street, who are the people in your neighborhood? And ¿Quiénes son los gentes en su barrio? Which isn't right, not grammatically, but you think about, the popular songs or, songs you grew up with, and you translate them into different languages. And that, I think, helps the learning process as well.
Oh, absolutely. In the reading, listening, practicing your pronunciation is very important too.
Even watching movies, even if you have the subtitles, below, you're still hearing, the language as it's being. There's, What did I watch?
Yeah, I also I'm not sure if you experimented with this, Carrie, but I also read quite a bit, and I've tested it. There's something called subconscious learning, and so you learn, as an experiment. For instance, you can go to YouTube and you put a YouTube on as you fall asleep, and when you're asleep, you're learning that language. So if you put a learning language in Spanish, for instance, you want to learn Spanish, and apparently it doesn't happen magically, and you're not going to wake up the next day speaking Spanish, but over time, your brain registered the sound wave, and then down the road, it's not so strange to you and accelerates the learning for you.
I believe it. I think of problems sometimes before I go to sleep, so my unconscious mind can think about it while I'm sleeping, and you wake up with maybe not the solution, but a few solutions. And so I totally buy into that. I believe that.
So, and now, if you take what we have today in the world we're living in, learning is available like at your fingertip, any subject, any topic you want. It's very easy to learn, either using electronic methods or using face-to-face methods, etc. And compare that back to like even 50, 60 years ago, not that long ago. And you would think, well, that wasn't possible before. I mean, I have to go to, like you were saying, resort to things like, go to private school or hire a tutor or, hire somebody to help me out. Today, with the variety of tools that we currently have at our disposal, the learning process, A, never stops. B, you can learn anything, and specifically in languages. You can learn any language you want. and it's available to you, and a lot of times they're free to learn. It's not like you have to pay for it. But you mentioned the experience that you have with the which I like, and I'm not sure if it's available to everybody, is hiring a nanny that speaks a different language. The kids learn immediately. Now, in a bilingual family, that happens naturally, organically. But if you don't, that supports that premise. Having another voice who speaks a different language in the family helps the kids get exposed to that language.
Yes. Yeah, I had a friend, a Swedish friend, who moved to the States, and she insisted on an au pair from a different country so her kids could grow up not only English, Swedish, and she married a Greek guy. I think their nanny was from Lithuania or something. So as many languages as possible. Yeah.
So, we've touched on several topics in our conversation today regarding language learning, Carrie. And you have expressed a lot of passion for this topic because it's natural to have passion to this topic because you want to see kids succeed. You want them to be brilliant in their future. And math and physics and arts and culture are very important, but learning another language opened that much money door for that individual, for that kid down the road to have much better future, in my opinion. We're wrapping it up here. Any further comments on the topic and anything else you'd like to add to this?
Funny, I just thought of something. The people that are probably watching this are in the local industry, right? So they already know. They probably agree with us already. I think, maybe the question is how should we make our outreach to people beyond the localization industry to really hit home the benefits of learning another language? And I don't know, community outreach in our own, communities. I live in Idaho. Most people look like me, with very few exceptions. The Chobani yogurt place out in Twin Falls, he is an immigrant and he will only hire immigrants. So that's why I buy Chobani yogurt. But so we have little pockets, in Idaho, but I think the better question maybe is how do we outreach to the people beyond our industry who already know the benefits of learning a different language? And that's maybe the question that I want people to comment on. What else can we do in our own community? For me, it's reaching out to Boise State and go talk to the people that are just starting, freshmen, and what language, how could language possibly benefit me? Yeah, I think it's a local outreach.
So you bring up a very good point. I mean, these conversations similar to the one we have today, I think we need to increase the frequency of those conversations because eventually these conversations are going to fall on the right ears, and eventually those conversations, they're going to affect the right people in a positive way. So we need to increase our dialogues around this topic. And you're absolutely correct in terms of influencing our society, our organizations, our political system, in some cases, to address this particular topic in terms of teaching young kids at a young age another language. It's a fascinating topic, to be honest with you. We could talk about it for hours. I want to thank you for coming online with me today, Carrie. Good to see you again. And
you too.
Hopefully down the road we have a little bit more, a lot more, I want to say, topics that we can dig deeper into. You're always welcome back to this channel. Consider it your own. You're always welcome. You're not a guest. You're almost an owner of this with me. I consider everybody who comes here is part of this story that we're trying to tell. This is not just about the localization industry. This is the localization industry telling their story to the world. And what we do in the localization industry is not just delivering services for profit, which we all operate businesses in that regard. The other thing that we do is a more humanitarian effort as an industry. And the humanitarian effort is in creating those interconnectivities between demographics, between different cultures, between different countries, and reducing that friction, if you will. I hope to think that are translating to another language and making people understand another language, understand each other, reduces the friction between those societies and contribute to world peace. Now, you heard it first on this channel. Localization industry contributes to world peace, and I truly believe that.
We all need to run for office. That's what needs to happen. We need to get ourselves in the political, arena, and then real change will happen.
Absolutely. Good to have you online with me again, Carrie. Thank you for coming. I really appreciate it. And thanks for taking the call with me today. For our audience, thank you very much for being with me this morning, and look forward to seeing you in another episode, in another engaging episode. Please like and subscribe to our channel. We really appreciate that. Thank you again.
Thanks, Robin.
Thanks for tuning in to the Localization Fireside Chat. Take the warmth of knowledge and renewed cultural passion with you. Keep exploring, stay curious, and until next time, this is Robin Ayub. Keep those global conversations alive.